On this episode of Book Reports Podcast,
Scottish stereotypes,
Cat Stevens' potassium levels,
Lucky Luciano,
Thunder Thighs Jacobs,
Too Much Eddie Murphy,
Dr. Sam MD,
and much, much more. Hello, and welcome to a very special Valentine's episode of Book Reports Podcast. I'm Sam, read all night long Tyler.
I'm Bryce Diener.
And we want to give a very, very special happy Valentine's Day to all you very literate ladies out there.
And the guys.
And seeing as it's this Valentine's Day, and Bryce and I are single, keeping in that theme of not having anyone to love, we don't have any guests today.
That's right, it's just Sam and I and our loneliness.
Awkwardly staring across the table at one another, realizing how shallow and empty our lives are.
Now, Sam, I didn't think this was creepy enough.
Oh,
so
thank
I
you.
decided to write you a limerick. Because I'm Irish, that's all we can do.
Our guests were aghast. They decided to pass. They called us a sham. My name is Sam. Welcome to Book Reports Podcast. Very nice, Bryce.
Thank you.
Very nice. Bryce, what kind of books do you tend to enjoy reading?
I have to stop myself from always doing a World War II book every episode, I think.
So you tend to stem towards nonfiction, it seems like. You've only done, one fiction book so far?
Yeah, maybe one or two.
First episode? You did Holes.
Yep.
Obviously, you tend to read, I'd say about 11 nonfiction books for every one fiction book that you read. What drives you towards nonfiction as opposed to fiction?
I like to think that there's such an incredible story that I'm reading, and I don't like to think that it's a lie. I like to know that what I'm reading actually happened and that these extraordinary people have existed, and whether they've distorted the truth a little bit.
So you find an extra thrill in reading a book knowing that it actually happened.
Right.
Not in the skill of the storytelling, not in the styling, but just much more so knowing that it's true is what matters the most.
Now, the whole wrinkle in my statement is that my favorite book is Harry Potter and the whole series, which I'll say happened. You can't prove it didn't.
You filthy muggles! Well, you said in our first episode that Holes was your first big book that you enjoyed.
Exactly. Yeah, the one that I was forced to read it, but then I kind of enjoyed it.
And how old were you again?
I think, I was like 11 or 12.
Oh, that's not too bad. You're not too bad. Yeah, you're doing just fine then.
Hey, Sam. What was the
Well, as for fiction, science fiction, fantasy, obviously. I'm getting more into historic fiction as well with the Aubrey Matern series.
Right.
Looking to start the Sharpe's Rifle series soon, which will be pretty fun. I just tend to enjoy lots of different kinds of things. Starting to read more crime fiction as well lately. That's been kind of interesting to try to get into mysteries and that kind of thing. As long as what the book is about is interesting to begin with, I'm probably going to read it when it comes to nonfiction.
Okay.
Military history, espionage.
Oh, spies.
How about that? World War II and spies. This is really crazy. And just anything that seems thrilling and exciting, I'll read nonfiction-wise.
Right.
Anything that just seems like it'd be a good, fun thing to know about.
Right.
Books on architecture, books on just about any subject that just seems like this is going to be interesting to learn about. I'm currently reading a book all about mass-produced art from the Victorian era, which has been pretty fun to read about. My favorite thing from that book so far is the knowledge of the Christmas game Snapdragon. Have you heard of this, Bryce?
No, I haven't.
A whole bunch of kids at a Christmas party get a basin, fill it with brandy, put almonds and raisins in it, light the brandy on fire, and they try to pull the almonds and the raisins out of it without burning their fingers.
That sounds awful. There was one last thing I wanted to ask you. Do you remember how we came to the name Book Reports Podcast?
Yes, I told you the name you came up with was stupid.
And we should use this one instead.
I recall you having a name you wanted to do first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the name was?
I believe the name of it was Book Reports You Can Enjoy and Some Awesome Movies.
And what does that spell?
Mickey Mouse.
No, that spells Bryce and Sam. And I thought it was very clever.
You were very clever.
But then we realized it was going to take too long to read 3 books and watch a movie with a guest. So we cut back the awesome movie part.
That is true. The original podcast idea was for us to talk about multiple books each episode.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And then watch a movie as well.
Yeah, then we shortened it down to become Book Reports Podcast.
Right. Did you want to write stuff down?
Yeah, I got the book for that, so that
Okay.
I don't have
Oh,
stuff
look
to
at you with your...
Got this
Like a reporter. Ace reporter. On his beat.
Bryce Diener, tell me more about your book.
The year is 1942. Hitler has invaded Czechoslovakia. The Lindy Hop is hopping.
Lucky Luciano.
Lucky Luciano. That's just a boxer.
No, it's not. It's a gangster.
Oh, was he?
Isn't it? I think it's a gangster.
Who boxed
yeah, his rivals.
His victims. Most people used guns. Lucky Luciano.
He was one of the few people who do a drive-by punching.
Just leaning out of the car with his fist outside the window.
I really hope he wasn't a boxer, having said that. I hope he was a gangster.
I know, I hope so too now.
So, Bryce.
Yes.
I'm guessing, because this is our 11th episode, I'm guessing you read a book. What book did you read?
I have gotten into the pattern of reading. I finally learned the lesson. The book that I chose for this episode is The Woman Who Swallowed a Toothbrush by Rob Myers, M.D. And that stands for, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor.
Doctor.
Doctor. And the subtext is, and other bizarre medical cases. And so what Rob Myers did was collect different bizarre stories from medical journals, stories that he has heard from peers. This really goes back to kind of the same type of book as the Urban Legends book that I was reading. Mm-hmm. He doesn't accept, friend of a friend, like we talked about in the episode. Right. He is a factual kind of guy. He says, I want to know.
Presumably there's medical records for all these if he's collecting them that way.
And so he was able to look into all these stories, and if it wasn't something that he trusted, he wasn't going to put it in the book. So every story in here, you can trust that these bizarre things have actually happened. The main story that we get here, the woman who swallowed a toothbrush, that actually was a woman who showed up in the ER with a toothbrush in her throat. They had to run an x-ray.
How deep into her?
You can feel where your Adam's apple is. Uh-huh. That's kind of where it was stuck.
Huh.
It didn't make it all the way down, and she's whispering the whole time because her larynx is being pressed upon by... Yeah. So she's... Well, I'm not going to whisper it because that doesn't make good audio. But
we'll just move the mic towards you.
I swallowed a toothbrush. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. But what they realized when they took the x-ray was that the toothbrush, the actual bristle part, was upwards. And so when you hold a toothbrush, you don't hold it that way. And so for whatever reason, the handle was going down first. And what they realized was that she was actually bulimic. And she was forcing herself to throw up with the handle of the toothbrush, and she slipped and she swallowed it. She was able to get help then. A lot of the stuff that he talks about in here is just accidental. There was one gentleman who was driving along a bumpy road. He had a toothpick in his mouth. He accidentally swallowed it. Because it's sharp, it punctured through his stomach into one of his main arteries, and he started bleeding internally. And he actually died because they couldn't find this toothpick in time.
Oh my goodness.
And so these aren't all happy endings. These aren't all special lessons that we can all learn. It's just sometimes stupid accidents happen.
You and I enjoy telling each other stories, and usually the gross, weird ones that happen to us.
Right.
I like the idea that doctors are doing the exact same thing we are, only lives are at stake. It's the exact same thing, just telling awful stories to each other. That is comforting.
And actually, one of the excerpts of the experts that I'm going to read to you. When they have hard cases that they can't get by themselves, they'll have meetings together.
Oh, yeah.
Like the ortho department will have meetings, or the pediatric department, and all these doctors will come together and try to solve this case together, which is really neat. When I was reading this book, I thought of the show House. If you guys like the show House.
The best murder mystery show ever made.
Turns out the real murderer was disease.
Well, that's the best part. It's a mystery show, but I can't guess who the murderer is because I don't know medicine. That's the best part.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. That's what I like about this book, though, is every story is maybe about 2 or 3 pages long. Sometimes they're a bit longer. And you get these odd medical mysteries. And it's fun for me to try to figure out beforehand what's going on. And so I've actually picked out a couple for you to play Sam House.
Okay.
So you ready for this?
Yes.
And listeners, you can go ahead and play along as well. I'll give you this clue. Both of these stories that I'm about to share with you involve fruit. We're going to the pediatric ward, Dr. Sam. There's a 7-year-old boy that presents with leg pains, swollen and bleeding gums in America. And so there's all these doctors that are really just confused about what could possibly go wrong with him. His main doctor can't figure it out, so he goes to this group of pediatric doctors. He presents the case, and they're all stumped by it. Turns out there's this very old Indian doctor in the back who's actually retired, and actually what he does in his retirement is just shows up to these bizarre meetings.
And bothers people.
And the way these rooms were set up is that the head doctors would be in the front row. They're kind of residents, and like the lesser important doctors would be behind them. And then all these like retired guys or people who just want to sit in on these meetings are in the way back.
So they're like people who go to courtrooms and sit and watch the trials. That's funny.
So here's this
Only they get to yell at people.
Here's this retired Indian doctor saying, "Hey, I actually know what's going on." And they're like, "Oh boy, we are stumped. We have no idea what's going on." And he gives them the obvious answer. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can figure it out.
You said puffed up gums.
Yep, and swollen legs.
Swollen legs. I'm gonna guess.
Okay.
He tried to eat a pineapple without chewing it and just ate it in one big piece.
No.
And it grayed against his gums, causing them to be inflamed, and it landed into his leg, making it heavy.
No. So remember, the Indian doctor was able to figure this out.
Right. Too much curry.
It rhymes with curry.
Too much Eddie Murphy.
Pirates.
Stir-free. Scurvy.
Scurvy.
Oh, that's
very
interesting.
Good.
Okay.
So what
puffed up gums, of course. Okay.
So what it turns out is that this kid, all he was eating was like McDonald's and like fast food stuff, and not actually getting any vitamins or any nutrients that he needs from food. His parents just weren't taking good care of him.
Right.
And because this Indian doctor who grew up in India, he saw a lot of malnourishment from these children as well. And so he was able to quickly understand that, hey, this kid just needs a couple oranges. And within like a few weeks, he was back to normal. And
it makes sense that the gums, I probably should have gotten it from that
Sure.
one. But it's interesting to think that scurvy is such a rarity that doctors can't treat it now.
Right.
I mean, that is sort of an interesting, almost a treadmill effect of medical knowledge.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. There's actually something very scary in the medical world called orphan diseases. And what these diseases are, they're so rare that only like maybe a couple hundred or less people actually have it. And
but nobody can treat them.
Well, no, they can.
Oh,
they
but it's not worth it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The drug companies don't find it worth their money to actually make these drugs. So they're considering not providing the actual drugs to these patients who could die from like these rare diseases.
Mm-hmm. That is supply and demand. And it goes back to the idea, if there's nobody to have scurvy anymore, there's no reason to teach people how to treat scurvy or to diagnose it. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that kid was very lucky to have this, just happen to have this retired old Indian doctor.
Retired sea captain. I think I know what the problem is here, sir. First cut off his hand and give him a hook. Then limes.
In the silence, we heard a peg leg enter the room. Followed by the rest of the person.
Belay that orthodonture. Give me another chance.
You got another one coming? Okay, here you go.
I'm feeling lucky since I'm 1 for 1 so far.
You're feeling peckish for more. All right, so this one is titled Near Death by Potassium. A normal level of potassium in a human being is anywhere between 3.5 to 5 mmOLs per liter. So I think that's millimeters?
mmOLs?
Yeah,
I believe that stands for Massive Multiplayer Online...
Per liters.
Per liters.
We'll just say it's 3.5 to 5 per liters.
mmOL?
Yeah, that's what it says.
mmOL.
But the way they...
How can I be expected to get this right if I don't have all the information?
Go to medical school, come back in 10 years, we'll ask you the same question.
Learn metric, you freak!
So, the average range of a person's potassium is like 3.5 to 5. So this patient, Mrs. Stevens, they usually give fake names.
I'm going to assume that this is the girl from Even Stevens.
You're right.
Just to keep
Ren
it simple.
Stevens.
Yeah. Cat Stevens. Make it really sad.
AKA Yusuf Muhammad.
Yeah, there you go. Well done.
And he can't fly on planes. So Cat Stevens presents...
Cat Stevens presents?
Cat Stevens is admitted to the hospital with high potassium levels. I think your brain may already be going here. What fruit or vegetable do we know has a lot of potassium?
I would say the banana.
That's right. That's not going to be the answer to the story, so you can already get that out of your head.
I'm probably still going to say banana if it's okay with you.
Well, you're bananas if you think that. Thought of a terrible joke. You want to hear it?
Yes.
What is an orphan?
And if you listen to this podcast, you probably want to hear it too.
If you're still listening. What is an orphan's favorite dessert?
A loving family.
No. Bananas foster home.
Oh. That's going to be in the final edit.
Fantastic.
So Cat Stevens is admitted to an orphanage with too much potassium in his gums.
So his level of potassium is 8.2, which, if you do the math, that's a lot more than is necessary.
Sorry, what was the average? That's been a while.
3.5 to 5.
Okay.
And they're at 8.2. So their potassium is off the charts.
Right.
And so these doctors can't figure out what is going on. They're trying to do blood tests. It just so happens that a resident comes by and asks them what they've been eating.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out this individual has started a new extreme diet plan. And so they are drinking 5 liters a day for the past 3 months of a certain drink.
Oh.
And it is causing their potassium levels to go out the roof.
Right.
So go ahead, based on that. It's not bananas.
So you're asking me what they were drinking?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Essentially, yeah. I figured based off my vague descriptions, you weren't going to get it.
I'm just wondering. Okay. Okay. So based on that, what they're drinking, I'm gonna guess orange soda.
Close.
Really? Okay.
It's not soda.
It's orange juice?
You got it.
Oh,
so this person
okay.
has been drinking 5 liters of orange juice every day for 3 months.
Wow.
And their potassium levels are just out the roof.
That is very extreme.
It is. I guess they're just thinking all this vitamin C is going to give you so much energy and all this other stuff. And so her body couldn't handle it all, and her kidneys actually started shutting down because of the potassium. What I did like about this book is he explains medical terms in a way that the average non-medical person can understand.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's exactly what that book needs.
Right. If I read the whole story, you'd understand what potassium actually did to the human body. Or he explains things like catheters, how they enter the body, things like
what
stents.
What story was going on that a catheter needed to be explained, Bryce?
Well, he actually mentions that a few times.
This is a Valentine's Day special, after all.
Oh, sure. Well, sometimes he'll say the patient was admitted, a catheter was placed in.
Oh, okay.
A catheter does this.
Okay.
And so there was actually a few medical terms that I didn't know, which I was thankful that he described them to you. And he does it in such a way that he isn't talking down to you.
That's good. That's great.
He isn't treating you like some moron and he's the superior doctor. He's like, hey, these are difficult terms. I understand. And so,
what was the worst, most horrifying thing you read in this book?
Let's find one. Oh, here's a good one. A 66-year-old Russian woman. And she was complaining of eye problems. And she sneezes, and her eye pops out of socket. And, yeah. And she's there with her kids. She doesn't speak any English, I don't believe. And she's there with her kids who kind of speak some English, like broken English. And, the nurses are there standing oh, what's going on? And they're like, oh, yeah, that happens sometimes. So it's not the first time that her eyes are just popping out of socket.
It's a great party trick. My goodness. I bet that she's used that to get to the front of lines before.
Yeah, let me look around this corner quick.
She doesn't need a rearview mirror. So the optic nerve apparently is loose enough that the eye can pop out of its socket and go right back into place.
There was too much pressure in the muscles behind her head.
It shot her eye out of her face.
Well, yeah, her eyes were being popped out of socket.
Oh my goodness!
So that was
Do they list treatments for that? What they?
They didn't actually list what happened with that one. Which I thought was a shame. There were a couple stories here that the story ended too soon.
An attractive man goes by. Aruga, Aruga. That is amazing, Bryce. My life is so much richer than it was a second ago. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
So yeah, definitely not a book for kids, but it was an interesting read if you're into the weird, bizarre medical stuff. Definitely good for that. Was there anything I didn't like about this book?
Well, no, that's a good point, yeah. So this is a Bryce that really is in your wheelhouse. It's got medical...
Bryce that's in my way.
It's what? What?
You said it's a Bryce that's in my
It's a Bryce that's in your wheelhouse, Bryce. Book, yeah.
Well, yay, finally you screwed up.
We have to make a lot of noise about it because it happens so rarely. Yeah. So this is a book that is very, very you, I would say.
Yeah,
Medical oddities,
sure.
Short story compilations put together. It's nonfiction. It definitely seems like a book that fits you very, very nicely.
Yeah, it definitely was.
What didn't you like about it, if any?
That's a great question. Thank you.
It's worked 11 times before.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, like you were saying, it's just like, it's up my alley.
Sam, ask me this question. I have no answer for it, and I'm going to make fun of you when you try to ask it to me. Sure, Bryce. Sure.
So, Sam, I think you read a book you're catching on as well.
Yeah, I just happened to have read a book this month.
Oh, thank heavens.
It is the Penguin Book of Horror Stories, edited by J.A. Cudden.
Wait, so it's not actually a book about penguins?
It is not.
It's from Penguin Publishing?
Yeah, Penguin is a company that tends to do lots of reprints of older stuff and compilation books, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Lots of classics, that kind of stuff. This is a book I did not enjoy, but I think I did not enjoy it in a very interesting way. It's a very idiosyncratic book. No, I'm done, actually. Goodbye, everybody. You went too long in your section, Bryce. You had to lose something. Good night, everybody. It was an interesting read.
Okay.
I enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed not liking it. So it is a book I do not recommend. It is a book I do not plan on rereading, but it was a very interesting, weird book that I did not enjoy in an idiosyncratic, strange way. Okay. Horror is a very subjective thing. A story that is scary to one person or is horrifying to one person is going to be completely lost on another person. Right. And J.A. Cudden has a different style of horror and a different sense of horror than I do. And that was interesting to read through this book. There are a couple different versions of short story books. Like, this is full of short horror stories. And most anthologies give you a really good spread of different kinds of stories. Okay. Other anthologies focus in on a really narrow subject. Like, these are all stories that involve witches. These are all stories that are written by this author. This is a book that's one of the general ones, so it's got a good spread of different stories across a spread of time. In fact, the stories are arranged by the time they're written.
These are different authors as well?
Yeah, all different authors. The editor is the guy who decided what stories to put in.
Okay. Also sounds like a cheap way to get a few bucks.
Well, it
Someone
can
else did all the work.
A short story anthology is not an incredibly expensive book to produce, especially if it's not original material. Mm-hmm. Like, he's not going out and he's not hiring authors to write this stuff. This is all classic horror stories, although towards the end they're more modern. I don't think any of those were specifically commissioned for this collection, though. This was the first indication this was going to be a hard read for me. The introduction. J.A. Cudden wrote the introduction, and I'm pretty sure it is just a piece he wrote for some other publication that's been pasted on as an introduction. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Because it is over 40 pages long and the longest piece of writing in this book.
His intro.
Mm-hmm. And it's basically a history of horror fiction focusing on hell and the supernatural, which is not the focus at all of this book whatsoever. He's a fairly scholarly person. He has a perspective, which is great. It's good to have an editor with a perspective, even if it's one I don't agree with. But it was a bit of a slog to get through for me. It was really annoying having an introduction at the beginning of a book that is longer than any of the stories in it. That is not something I would recommend anybody doing if you're putting together.
So you're saying you think he wrote it for a different story?
He basically had to have. Who writes a 40-page introduction for a short story anthology by Penguin Books? Like, they're a reprint company. You know, original stuff isn't really what they tend to put out. So do you think maybe it could have even
been ghostwritten and they just threw his name on?
Whoa! No, I don't think so. He clearly wrote the introduction. That's clearly him writing it. Okay. Having read this and deciding, hey, I did enjoy this book, I decided to do a little bit of analysis. And there are 43 stories. Of those 43 stories, I am glad I read 14 of them. Of those 43 stories, I didn't care about 15 of them. And the remaining 14 stories I hated. That gives you a bit of the metrics.
Well, let me ask you, since it is a horror story, of those first 14, did they actually scare you?
To say that I'm glad I read a horror story means I was either intrigued by the author's style, genuinely terrified or emotionally invested in the story, in a way other than going, this story is terrible, which is a different kind of emotional investment I enjoyed in the stories I hated. Or it was a story that I just found so interesting I kept thinking about it and munching it over in my head. There's another metric I use to look at the stories in this book. Mr. Cudden has a definite preference for certain kinds of stories in this book, and that is my main reason for not enjoying this one. He really enjoys stories that have the exact same plot, and that plot is weird, creepy atmosphere for about 12 pages to 20 pages, and then a quick psychotic murder at the very end. And that happened a good 6 times in this book. and they're all clumped together at the end. And
Aw.
it was so frustrating just to be like, oh, here's an interesting story. Oh, wait a second. Okay, we're having a weird spiral into madness, and then, yep, he killed somebody. Okay, and we're done. All right, that's the end of that story. Next one, and, same thing again. Okay. And it was so annoying. With horror, you can have so many different cool things and interesting things happen with it. Supernatural, or people just being awful, or whatever it is. He really gravitated towards stories where it's just man is the real monster. 24 out of 43 stories were that.
So the other ones would probably be like maybe like ghosts or zombies or
that kind of
something
stuff.
like that.
Yeah. And honestly, I prefer that quite a bit to just reading a story where somebody is awful to another person. And honestly, like, a lot of those stories aren't even horror; they're crime stories too.
Sure.
It's not really horrific. It didn't really jostle me in any way. It didn't excite me. It didn't thrill me in any way. It was just sort of, oh, another story like this. Great. And there were also some other stories that were just bizarre and fun to read that were awful as well. My favorite awful story in this book is called...
Awful in the sense of it was so poorly written or just too funny that it's not really a horror story.
Let's let you be the judge after I describe this story to you.
Okay.
This is The Reptile by Augustus Muir.
Okay.
This story was so bizarre and takes such a strange twist that makes absolutely no darn sense whatsoever that when I read the story, I got angry at it. Like, that's how awful this story was, in my opinion. The basic plot of the story, there is a Scottish student on a trip to Germany.
Okay.
And this character is written in almost a parody of being Scottish. Like, there are points where he's like, oh, my great Scottish blood, I could smash the faces of all these weak Germans around me, you know.
And then he ate haggis.
Yeah.
And played the bagpipe.
Let me change my kilt! Yeah. There are whole phrases of this story that are written in this really bizarre, stereotypical Scottish style.
Right.
Which didn't help me take this story more seriously whatsoever. I don't think the story's meant to be funny.
Okay.
But anyway, so this Scottish guy is in
Was
Germany.
that the real horror, maybe? Is all the stereotypes?
It might have been. Actually, no. I can say without a shadow of a doubt,
Okay.
the real horror of this story is yet to come.
Oh.
It's worse than that.
Okay.
So this Scottish guy gets a headache, so he decides he's going to stay in his hotel room instead of going off on his professor to study. A couple of German men approach him in his bedroom while he is sleeping and ask him, hey, would you like to make some money? If you come with a car ride with us and talk to somebody, we'll give you money. He's like, no, that's doom! You know? And you're like, well, we'll give you lots of money, huh? Money, huh? And he's like, okay, I'll go with you. So he goes off with them in a car. And he gets nervous because it's two guys and him, but then he looks at me and he's like, oh, I could take these wee German babies. I'm a Scotsman, you know. And they take him off out of the city to an abandoned farmhouse, and he goes inside.
This looks nothing like Glasgow.
Let me go back to my hotel. Need to change my kilt. The door locks behind him.
Dun, dun, dun.
He discovers that there is a woman bound and gagged and unconscious on the couch, and he's looking around trying to figure out what's going on. Suddenly, a gigantic snake slithers into the room.
What?
And he fights the snake. The fight with the snake was reasonably thrilling. That wasn't, you know, it was exciting enough. It's like, oh, a snake fight. What's going on? Like, at this point in the story, I'm
so sick of these snakes in this darn cabin.
At this point in time, I was with the story.
Right.
Like, it was reasonably exciting. It was weird. What was going on next? It's silly. It's over the top. He fights the snake, and he kills it.
Okay.
The door opens, and a guy steps in. The Scotsman immediately attacks him and starts throttling him. Somebody hits him from behind, and he goes unconscious.
Okay.
He wakes up in a moving car, and he sees that man, and the man goes, "Ah ha ha, thank you very much for your help, Mr. Scotsman. You see, we're a German movie company, and our star died last week. We saw that you look just like him, so we abducted you, and had you come in and film the very last scene without you knowing it. Don't worry about that snake. It was a fake snake made by our prop department, and you've been photographed this entire time. And don't go to the police. After all, you agreed to come and make money for us by going to this room. Oh, and then the story ends. Like, it was just a terrible, awful, awful explanation of the rest of the story. Like, there was that's not a horror, you know.
I did not see that coming.
The real horror, well, I decided to reread it, just to be like, okay, let's give this story another chance. I know what the ending is coming.
Right.
The guys who are hiring him do say, you look a lot like our friend, and we want to take photographs of you. Maybe I missed that the first time reading it.
Sure.
But at the same time, that still is a ridiculous, not at all plausible ending. It was so terrible. It was such a terrible story. I enjoyed how much I hated it. That was my perspective on that one.
You said that the author listed these in terms of years they were written.
Yeah,
is that correct? That's from one of the more recent ones?
He doesn't give the actual dates, but I can tell by styling and so on that they are definitely grouped together by the time period. This is probably a story written in either the 20s or the 30s, I would have to say. That'd be my guess about the time period of it. And it is interesting, since they are listed by date, I can kind of see there are certain time periods I'm more likely to enjoy the stories during.
Sure.
I definitely have a lot more stories I enjoy in the first half of the book than the latter half of the book, which is when Cudden really puts in the stories where it's just, oh, and I murdered somebody, the end of the story. Obviously, I'm going to enjoy, okay, here's a Poe story. I like that Poe story. Here's a story by Henry James. That's great. Guy de Maupassant, Robert Louis Stevenson, M.R. James, all these guys that are horror stories I already enjoy are in this book. That's kind of the story of this book. Horror stories I did not find horrific.
Sure.
And a handful of stories I really enjoyed. And that was the interesting experience for me, was not knowing which this next story is going to be. It varied so much for me as finding out, okay, is this going to be a good story or is this going to be a terrible story where somebody kills somebody else at the very end of it? Because there's not much in between. One story I really enjoyed was by Roald Dahl of James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory fame. He wrote a really fun story called The Man from the South. This story's plot is that a young sailor makes a bet with an older, wealthier man that his lighter can light 10 times in a row without failing.
Okay.
If he wins this bet, he's getting the old man's brand new car. If he loses, the old man is getting the man's pinky.
Whoa.
Compared to all these other stories, where there's life and death and good and evil, the wager is a car or a pinky. Like, it's smaller stakes in comparison. Right. But the writing is so suspenseful and great. It's one of the best stories in the book. Because it's the suspense of, okay, it lit 1 time. It lit 2 times. It lit 3 times. And, that's the pace of the story is he gonna make the 10? Is he gonna get there? And there's all this build up. It's just, the story just builds and builds and builds in suspense to the point where it's like, okay, is he gonna lose his finger? Is he not gonna lose his finger? And it's a great story. When you compare it to the other stories in this book, the stakes are so low, but the suspense and the horror of, the sailor's hand gets strapped down to make sure that while he is lighting his cigarette, he can't run away from the table. It's this buildup of elements that are just making it more and more horrific and more terrifying, that this guy could lose a pinky. It's such a great story. I really enjoyed it.
Are you going to give the ending?
Why? What part of suspense don't you understand?
Oh, come on.
Do you want the ending?
I gave you the ending to my book.
Okay, if you do not want to hear the ending of Man from the South by Roald Dahl, cover your ears, young listeners. So here's what happens. They reach 8 when a woman bursts into the hotel room where they're doing the bet.
So 8 flicks of the lighter have gone off.
Mm-hmm. And
he
she
has
interrupts.
To make it to 10. Okay.
He is a menace, the woman said. Down where we live at home, he has taken altogether 47 fingers from different people, and he has lost 11 cars. In the end, they threatened to have him put away somewhere. That's why I brought him here. We were only having a little bet, mumbled the little man from the bed. The little man is the one who is making the bet that wants to take the pinky. I suppose he bet you a car, the woman said. Yes, the boy answered, a Cadillac. He has no car, it is mine. And that makes it worse, she said, that he should bet you when he has nothing to bet with. I am ashamed and very sorry about it. She seemed like an awfully nice woman. Well, I said, then here's the key to your car. I put it on the table. We were only having a little bet, mumbled the little man. He hasn't anything to bet with, the woman said. He hasn't a thing in the world. Not a thing. As a matter of fact, I won it all myself from him a long while ago. It took time, a lot of time, and it was hard work, but I won it all in the end. She looked up at the boy, and she smiled, a slow, sad smile. And she came over and put a hand to take the key from the table. I can see it now, the hand of hers. It only had 1 finger on it, and a thumb. Isn't that a great story? I mean,
that's pretty great.
It's such a great story. Honestly, I'm sorry to have ruined the ending, because the whole story is so well written.
I wanted a closure, though, so... That's a pretty good
I have to drive home, so... It's not a story that required lots of horrific elements to it. It's just suspense. But it still is, to me, more terrifying than any other stories in this book. Have you read any horror yourself? I've talked about it a bit, but do you actually read horror at all?
I think, the most horror I got into was in Cold Blood.
Okay.
And even after all this time, I still have trouble not saying in True Blood. In my head. It's like, yeah, it's definitely that vampire film. Bryce. Not the Truman Capote book.
I would love to read a vampire story written by Truman Capote. That sounds amazing. Oh my goodness.
What's interesting is that there is a movie, probably by the time this podcast comes out, that'll be in theaters or pretty close to being in theaters. It's about the Winchester Mansion.
That's fun.
But it's a horror film. And so, like, I think just the
story...
story...
it's probably not true, then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think just the story of the Winchester Mansion is interesting enough, because they do talk about it being created and constantly being rebuilt and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think I'd watch that. But then it's like, actually, but there's a demon in the house.
For people who don't know, the Winchester Mystery House is a crazily built, gigantic mansion built by the heiress of the Winchester fortune, as in Winchester rifles. She was so ridiculously wealthy that she just made it her life's hobby after her husband died, that she just continually added stuff to the house, and even things where it doesn't make any darn sense.
There's a reason. So the legend states that if she ever stops building her house, all the ghosts of anyone ever killed by a Winchester rifle will then possess her home.
Yeah, the legend goes that she went to a fortune teller who told her that. However, there's nothing in her character to suggest that she actually did that. There's no real, actual record of that. That's most likely just a legend that cropped up to explain the house. Here's what I think happened. She was in charge and made all the decisions for the construction of that house. And she hired workmen who were going to agree with whatever she said because she's a rich old lady, and she basically gave them jobs for the rest of their lives.
Okay.
She was not a trained architect. So she was bound to get measurements wrong, to have stairs leading nowhere, to have things that don't measure up. And if things didn't work right, tear it down and start over again. But they're not tearing everything down. So there are going to be doors that lead nowhere. Right. There are going to be stairwells just leading up where it's like maybe there was going to be something that maybe those stairs were going to lead somewhere. But it's like, you know what? Scrap those plans. We're doing something different. Leave the stairs. Why not? Like that I think is a lot more likely than that legend. Like that legend's too good and too on the nose, I think, for what's going on. You know
because
what I mean?
She's the Winchester.
Yeah. Like I don't...
Like if it was Mrs. Budweiser, everyone who's died being a DUI driver.
When Walt Disney and his Imagineers were designing the Haunted Mansion for Disneyland...
Oh. Did they go there?
They visited the Winchester Mystery House to get inspiration.
Oh, my word.
So just imagine all these animators, or not animators, but Imagineers just walking around the house getting ideas for an amusement park ride from that house.
See, nowadays, like, you can still go there and get a tour.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's, like, locked doors. Like, you can't actually explore the house. They probably were given, like, full run of the place.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's Disney. Who's going to say no?
Yeah, exactly. And, like, there's actual doors that, like, just open up onto, like, the third-story roof. And, like, you could, like, fall out by accident and stuff like that. So that's...
Wouldn't that be amazing? Oh, just to be able to wander that house. So cool.
Hopefully they got out.
No, they lost a few, but it was worth it.
Some say an Imagineer is still stuck in there.
I want to ride the Haunted Mansion, but the Haunted Mansion circa 1960, like the old days of it.
Did you ever see the movie?
With Eddie Murphy? I have not.
Wait, was it ever Eddie Murphy?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking Tower of Terror. I like Tower of Terror better.
Tower of Terror, was that a 90s movie?
Straight to TV film.
Yeah, okay.
90s Bryce was scared.
What movie scared you as a child, Bryce?
Like, I don't think, like, I wasn't really allowed to watch horror films.
But they don't have to be horror movies as a child, though. Like, for me, one of the movies is Brave Little Toaster. That air conditioner is terrifying.
Definitely, like, Home Alone.
Okay.
Was scary when I was much younger.
Were you scared by Macaulay Culkin or The Burglars? Because for me, it's Macaulay Culkin.
Pesci.
Okay.
I think.
This man might come and fake swear at me.
I remember there's actually a commercial that gave you a phone number of, like, who to call if you ever see abuse, and the actors were so good in it, I had to, like mute it or, like, run out of the room. 'Cause I was, like, maybe 8 or something like that, but it was a scary commercial. And it's like, why does this keep coming on? I had to get out of here.
That's really adorable.
Yeah.
Guys. That's amazing. Abuse
is not funny, though.
I don't think I have anything more to say about this book. Why don't you ask me what I didn't like about this book?
I'd like to take this time to thank our guests.
But we can't.
If you like content we put out, definitely go find us other places online. Leave comments. We actually do have a bit of fan feedback I'll share with you right now.
Oh?
For one, my roommate from college, Phil, really got into it. He didn't listen to it for like 10 episodes, and then he just binged them. And he says, once again, shocker, he likes your sections more than mine.
No, but I am continually surprised by that because, in my opinion, my sections of the podcast are the weakest. Because I'm
You're so humble.
Yeah,
You're so humble.
I'm so humble. When it comes to humility, I'm the best. Because in my opinion, you're the better at describing your book.
Okay.
And I'm the better at asking questions, which means your segments are more interesting.
Well,
and more
he definitely told me
interactive.
too, like, he likes you did like a short story book, kind of like the one I just did.
Okay.
Which is probably part of the reason why I just did the book I did. Phil. I did notice that it was this month that your cousin, Frank, liked our Facebook page. So maybe he'll have something nice to say about me.
Yeah,
since he's in your camp and everyone from my camp goes to you.
My relatives love you and everybody on your side loves me more.
There you go.
I think it's absence makes the heart grow fonder. If they really got to know me.
So Frank, if you're listening, please tell me what you like about me. Way back in the Caitlin episode for our Christmas special, I did an AJ Jacobs book, and I actually sent him an email because we're pretty big pen pals. And I was shocked. He actually, the next day, he responded.
Wow.
I said, hey, I'm just a big fan of yours. I covered your book for our podcast. He's like, Bryce, thank you so much. I enjoy that he actually used my first name because he could have just ignored that, even though I did put my name at the end. So he said, I will be listening to this when I walk my dog later tonight. And then he didn't respond for 24 hours, so it must have been a very long walk.
He got lost on the way home because he was so dazzled by our wit.
Or he's just that healthy. I don't know. It's a book about health.
That's a good point.
I don't know how long you walk a dog.
If there's one thing AJ Jacobs is known for, it's his thigh muscles. That's for sure.
Thunder Thighs Jacobs.
Thunder Thighs. That's what the AJ stands for.
And he told me that he really enjoyed it. And he actually listened to it in his big earmuff headphones.
That we reference on the show.
That we referenced. So
that's fantastic.
That tells me he listened to it. So that was a big boost. Another exciting thing for all you lovers of our podcast for a month of...
That's what we're calling our fans now. Our lovers. Hope you're okay with that, everybody.
For the lovers of our podcast, we are finally on YouTube, because one of the big things I've had with fans is like, I don't have iTunes. I don't know where to find you guys. I feel like being made fun of, fans.
Lovers, please.
Lovers. But you can find us on YouTube, finally, on Book Reports Podcast. Just type that into the search bar. You'll find our channel there with all of our episodes. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bookreportspodcast. You can email us at bookreportspodcast@gmail.com. And you can find Sam's blog, skullduggeryinthesmoke.blogspot.com. Sam, are you still on Constantinople? Or what?
Yes. I have successfully put together a PDF for the first part of this project, just giving an overview of the city and the cool stuff that's inside it. I'm working on doing the cities and the neighborhoods of Constantinople bit by bit. That's a bit larger of a project, but with a bit of a foundation now that I've got, I'm confident I'll be able to do that sometime this year.
And they can get that free off your
blog. Just go on the blog.
Great.
It's on the resource page.
That's awesome. Our theme song was written and produced by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more of his stuff at incompetech.com. I'm Bryce Diener.
And I'm Sam Tyler.
And we'll see you next episode. No,
care about the book.
That's perfect.
That's a great way to end that segment. I think that's lovely.
that's where the segment's ending.
Yeah.
None. Couldn't find anything wrong.
Nothing wrong with it.
I'm gonna get a drink of water quick.
Okay. I'm gonna go for a walk as well. I'm getting sleepy.
I will say this: there is a story about a boy who sits on the bottom of a pool and has his organ sucked out from the suction hole.
What?
And apparently it happened.
What?
I can't believe it. Yeah, I should have read the back.
That sounds so fake.